The deadbolt sliding into place is a sound you never forget. For Daniel Bennett, it was the sound of ultimate control, a final, triumphant click echoing through his $3 million suburban foyer as his wife stood shivering on the porch in a freezing November downpour. He poured himself a glass of 18-year-old Macallan, convinced he had just won the ultimate marital war. He thought a night in the cold would teach her a lesson in obedience. What Daniel didn't know was that as he took his first sip of scotch, the woman on the porch was pulling out her phone, and the single call she was about to make wouldn't just end their marriage, it would systematically obliterate his entire existence. The rain was coming down in sheets, an icy, punishing deluge typical of late autumn in the wealthy enclaves of Chicago's North Shore. At 4217 Oakwood Drive, a sprawling, modern Tudor home sat set back from the road, its massive bay windows glowing with warm, golden light. Inside, the temperature was a perfectly climate-controlled 72 degrees. Outside, it was hovering just above freezing. And outside was exactly where Rachel Bennett found herself, standing barefoot on the imported slate tiles of her own front porch. She was wearing nothing but a pair of thin cotton pajama pants and a lightweight grey cashmere cardigan. Her damp hair was already plastered to her cheeks, the icy wind cutting through her clothes like a serrated knife. She stared at the heavy mahogany front door, her mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Less than 5 minutes ago, she and Daniel had been standing in the kitchen. It hadn't even started as a screaming match. It had started as a simple, terrifyingly calm question from Rachel. She had been balancing the books for their joint checking account, a chore Daniel usually insisted on handling himself, but he had carelessly left his laptop open on the kitchen island. Rachel had seen a wire transfer, $85,000, moved from their primary savings into an offshore LLC registered in Delaware, a company named Blue Horizon Holdings. When she asked him about it, Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't even attempt to invent a plausible excuse. Instead, his handsome, usually composed face had twisted into a sneer of absolute contempt. He had been drinking, not enough to be stumbling drunk, but enough to strip away the veneer of the polished corporate executive he presented to the world. "You're snooping, Rachel," he had spat, slamming the laptop shut with a sharp crack that echoed off the marble countertops. "You contribute absolutely nothing to this household financially, and you have the nerve to interrogate me about how I manage my money." "It's our money, Daniel," Rachel had replied, her voice trembling but holding its ground. "That savings account was for the renovations. It's half mine. Where did it go?" The gaslighting began immediately. He called her paranoid. He called her ungrateful. He told her she was losing her mind, that she was stressed and imagining things. But Rachel had pressed him. She had printed a screenshot. That was when the physical intimidation started. Daniel was a large man, 6'2" and broad-shouldered, a former collegiate rower who carried himself with the heavy entitlement of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. He had backed her out of the kitchen, his voice rising to a deafening roar, backing her through the hallway, past the sweeping grand staircase, all the way to the entryway. "You want to act like a crazy woman? You can go cool off like one," he had snarled, grabbing the lapels of her cardigan. He didn't hit her. Daniel was too smart for that, too aware of the legal implications of a bruise, but he shoved her roughly backward. Her bare feet slipped on the polished hardwood, and she stumbled backward through the open front door. Before she could regain her balance, the heavy mahogany door slammed shut in her face. Then came the sound. Click. The deadbolt. Followed by the electronic beep of the secondary smart lock, engaging. Rachel stood frozen in the rain for a full minute, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She pressed her hand flat against the cold, wet wood of the door. She expected him to open it. She expected this to be a cruel, fleeting scare tactic. She waited for the lock to turn, for him to pull her back inside with a mock apology, demanding she submit to his version of reality. 2 minutes passed, then 5. The motion sensor porch light clicked off, plunging her into darkness. Through the narrow sidelight window, she could see into the foyer. Daniel wasn't standing there, filled with regret. He was walking away. He moved with a relaxed, almost swaggering gait toward his study. She watched him walk over to the wet bar, select a crystal tumbler, and pour himself a generous measure of his favorite single malt scotch. He sank into his leather armchair, entirely unbothered, gazing into the gas fireplace. He had actually done it. He had locked his wife out in a freezing storm, without a jacket, without her keys, without her wallet. The cold was beginning to seep into her bones, causing her jaw to tremble uncontrollably. A normal person in her situation might have panicked. A normal person might have started banging on the door, weeping, begging to be let back in. They might have run across the sprawling lawn to the neighbors, the Gables, sobbing and asking to use their phone to call the police. But Rachel didn't cry. The shock was rapidly dissolving, replaced by an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in the 7 years she had been married to Daniel Bennett. It was a cold, crystalline, absolute rage. She reached into the pocket of her cashmere cardigan. Her fingers, stiff and pale from the cold, brushed against the cold metal of her smartphone. She had instinctively grabbed it off the kitchen counter when Daniel started backing her toward the door. She pulled it out. The screen illuminated her wet, pale face in the darkness of the porch. The battery was at 72%. Rachel looked through the window one last time. Daniel was laughing at something on his phone, probably texting his mistress. Yes, Rachel knew about Clara. She had known about the 26-year-old junior accounts manager for 6 months. She had chosen to stay silent, quietly gathering evidence, biding her time, trying to figure out the most surgical way to untangle her life from this monster. Daniel thought he had married a meek, middle-class art history major who was entirely dependent on his 6-figure salary. He thought he was the undisputed king of the castle. You have no idea, Rachel thought, the freezing rain mixing with a single tear of pure, liberated adrenaline running down her cheek. You have absolutely no idea whose house you are sitting in. She turned her back on the mahogany door and stepped off the porch into the pouring rain. To understand the sheer magnitude of the mistake Daniel Bennett had just made, one had to understand the intricate web of lies that formed the foundation of their marriage. Daniel was the senior vice president of acquisitions at a formidable Chicago logistics firm named Apex Financial. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of his own ambition. He drove a slate-grey Porsche Panamera, wore bespoke suits imported from Italy, and spent his weekends schmoozing with local politicians and minor celebrities at the Oak Brook Polo Club. He was entirely self-made, or so he loved to remind everyone. He had clawed his way up from a lower middle-class upbringing in Ohio, and as a result, he viewed wealth not just as money, but as a weapon. It was a tool to dominate, to control, and to demand submission from those around him. When he met Rachel 7 years ago at a charity gala, he saw the perfect accessory. Rachel was stunning, but quietly so. She wore minimal makeup, dressed in understated, elegant clothes, and spoke with a soft, gentle cadence. She told him she worked at a small, independent art gallery downtown. She lived in a modest apartment. She seemed entirely unimpressed by his flashy car and his bragging about his stock portfolio, which only made Daniel want to conquer her more. He courted her aggressively. He showered her with expensive dinners, weekend trips to Aspen, and grand romantic gestures. When he finally proposed, he did it with a 3-carat diamond ring, expecting her to weep with gratitude. She had said yes, but her reaction was composed, steady. Daniel had chalked it up to her being overwhelmed by her good fortune. He had saved her from a life of mediocrity. Throughout their marriage, Daniel cultivated a dynamic of total financial control. He insisted Rachel quit her job at the gallery. "I make more than enough for both of us, darling. Why stress yourself?" And took over all their accounts. He gave her a generous allowance, but he monitored every penny she spent. He needed her dependent. He needed her to know that the roof over her head, the food on her plate, and the clothes on her back existed solely because of his brilliance. But Daniel's arrogance had blinded him to the most basic rule of predators. Never assume you are the most dangerous creature in the room. Rachel was not a middle-class art history major. Her maiden name was not Rachel Smith, as it appeared on the forged background documents she had meticulously created in her 20s. Her real name was Rachel Kingston. She was the youngest daughter of Jonathan Kingston, the notoriously reclusive billionaire founder of Kingston Global, a massive international conglomerate that owned everything from commercial real estate portfolios in Dubai to shipping fleets in the Pacific. The Kingston family wealth was old, vast, and completely off the grid of public Forbes lists. Rachel had grown up suffocated by that wealth. She had watched money tear her family apart, turn her siblings into paranoid sociopaths, and attract a never-ending swarm of sycophants and gold diggers. In her mid-20s, desperate for a normal life, she had struck a deal with her father. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to live as an ordinary person, to find someone who loved her for her mind and her heart, not her trust fund. Her father, surprisingly understanding, had agreed, but on one condition. She would remain under the quiet, invisible protection of the family's wealth. The apartment Daniel thought she rented when they met? She owned the entire building. The art gallery she worked at? A tax write-off fully funded by a Kingston Shell Corporation, and the $3 million modern Tudor home on Oakwood Drive that Daniel proudly boasted about buying for them. The home where he had just locked her out. Daniel hadn't bought it. 3 years ago, when Daniel was desperate to move into the prestigious neighborhood to impress his bosses, he had been rejected for the massive mortgage. He was over-leveraged, swimming in hidden debt from bad crypto investments. Rachel had quietly intervened. She had a Kingston proxy firm purchase the house in cash. They then created a fake leasing agreement, disguised as a rent-to-own mortgage, through a fictitious bank. Daniel Bennett had been writing a monthly mortgage check for 3 years to a bank that did not exist. Every cent of his mortgage went directly into a charitable trust fund for stray animals set up in Rachel's name. He didn't own a single brick of the house he was currently sitting in. Inside the house, oblivious to the storm both outside and the one about to crash down upon his life, Daniel poured himself a second glass of Macallan. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure messaging app. He navigated to his conversation with Clara. Daniel. Finally got some peace and quiet. The ball and chain is throwing a tantrum outside. Thinking about you. Clara. Outside. Is it raining? You're so bad, Daniel. When are you going to drop the dead weight? Daniel. Soon, babe. Just moving some final pieces around. I transferred the $85,000 to the Blue Horizon account today. The down payment for the condo is secure. Once the divorce papers are served, she won't be able to touch a dime of it. She's completely clueless. He smiled, leaning back in his chair, the firelight dancing across his smug features. He felt like a master chess player, moving pawns across the board. He had his beautiful, young mistress. He had his stolen money. He had his prestige. and he had successfully put his nagging wife in her place. He took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the scotch. It tasted like victory. Rachel walked across the wet grass, the freezing mud seeping between her bare toes. She bypassed the sprawling, heated garage where Daniel's beloved Porsche was parked and headed for the side driveway. Parked there, exposed to the elements, was her car. A 5-year-old, unremarkable beige Volvo station wagon. Daniel hated the car. He said it embarrassed him when the neighbors saw it. He had offered to buy her a Range Rover, but Rachel had insisted on keeping the Volvo. She liked it. It was practical. It also had reinforced bullet-resistant glass and a military-grade satellite communication system hidden beneath the dashboard, a non-negotiable safety requirement from her father's security team. She opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut, instantly cutting off the roar of the wind and rain. The interior of the car was freezing, the leather seats biting into her damp pajamas. Her fingers were shaking so violently she could barely operate the ignition. She pushed the start button, and the engine purred to life. She cranked the heat to maximum, holding her numb, blue hands over the vents, waiting for the warm air to start flowing. She sat there in the dark for a long time. The streetlights illuminated the heavy rain pounding against the windshield. 7 years. She had given Daniel Bennett 7 years of her life. She had played the part of the devoted, supportive wife flawlessly. She had cooked his meals, organized his social calendar, ironed his shirts, and swallowed his daily microaggressions and condescending remarks. She had truly tried to make it work, holding on to the delusion that beneath his arrogance was the charming man she had met at the gala. But tonight, the illusion shattered completely. The physical shove, the lockout, the theft of their joint money to fund his exit strategy with a 26-year-old. It was the final, undeniable proof. Daniel was not a flawed man trying his best. He was a parasite. And Rachel Kingston didn't tolerate parasites. She picked up her phone. She unlocked it and swiped past her usual contacts. The local PTA moms, the florist, the dry cleaner. She opened a hidden, encrypted application buried deep in the phone's operating system. It required a 12-digit passcode, followed by a biometric retina scan. The screen turned a stark, glowing crimson. A single contact name appeared on the screen. Gregory Blackwood. Gregory Blackwood was not a hitman. He was something much more terrifying. He was the Kingston family's principal fixer, a brilliant, ruthless attorney and former intelligence operative who managed the family's most delicate and high-stakes crises. He commanded an army of forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and private investigators. His job was to protect the Kingston Empire and destroy anyone who threatened it. Rachel hadn't spoken to Gregory in 5 years. The last time they spoke was when he had secured the fake mortgage for the Oakwood Drive house. He had warned her then that Daniel was a grifter. She hadn't listened. She pressed the call button. It rang exactly once. "Rachel," a deep, impossibly calm voice answered. No pleasantries, no surprise, just immediate attention. "Gregory," Rachel said, her voice dropping its usual soft, melodic tone. The tremor of the cold vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened steel that sounded terrifyingly like her billionaire father. "I'm sorry to wake you." "I am never asleep when a Kingston calls," Gregory replied smoothly. "Where are you? Your GPS beacon shows you are outside the primary residence, stationary. Are you in danger?" "I'm in the Volvo," Rachel said, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at the glowing windows of the house. "Daniel locked me out. It's 34 degrees and raining. I'm in my pajamas." There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. When Gregory spoke again, the calm veneer remained, but the underlying tone was lethal. Understood. I am dispatching a private security team to your location now. They will breach the residence and secure him. A medical unit will— No, Rachel interrupted sharply. Call them off, Gregory. I don't want him touched. I don't want a physical altercation. Rachel, the man put hands on you and locked you in a freezing storm. He has crossed the red line. Your father gave me explicit instructions. My father is not managing this. I am, Rachel said. She took a deep breath of the warming air from the car's vents. Physical violence is too good for him. Gregory, he thinks he's a master of the universe. He thinks he holds all the cards. I want his universe dismantled, brick by brick. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning and realize he doesn't exist anymore. She heard the faint, rhythmic sound of Gregory typing on a mechanical keyboard in the background. I see. We are moving from containment to scorched earth. What are your parameters? I want Protocol Omega initiated, Rachel said, the words tasting like ash and iron in her mouth. Protocol Omega, Gregory repeated. Full financial, professional, and social liquidation. Once I press this button, Rachel, there is no undoing it. His life as he knows it will be erased. Do it, she commanded. Start with his job. He works for Apex Financial. Apex Financial, Gregory mused, the typing accelerating. Yes, I know them. Interestingly enough, Kingston Global acquired a 60% controlling stake in Apex's parent company 3 weeks ago through a proxy hedge fund. Technically, Daniel Bennett works for you. A dark, humorless smile touched Rachel's lips. Fire him. Effective immediately. For cause. Dig into his accounts. He wired $85,000 today to a shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings. I suspect he's been embezzling from his clients to fund his lifestyle and his mistress. Clara Higgins, Gregory provided instantly. Yes, we've been monitoring his communications with her for 6 months, per my standard security protocols. I have the wire transfer details on my screen right now. It was incredibly sloppy. He routed it through a server in the Cayman Islands, but the IP address traces back to his work laptop. That is federal wire fraud, Rachel. Freeze his accounts, Rachel ordered. All of them. His checking, his savings, his 401k, his secret crypto wallets. Drain the Blue Horizon account and flag it to the IRS for money laundering. Done, Gregory said. What about the mistress? Daniel just promised her a down payment on a luxury condo using my money, Rachel said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the window of Daniel's study. Send Mrs. Higgins's husband an anonymous, untraceable file containing every text, every photo, and every hotel receipt Daniel has ever sent her. Let her deal with the fallout of her own ruined marriage. Consider it sent, Gregory said. And the residence? The house is owned by Kingston Property Trust, Rachel said. Evict him. Tonight. I will have the local authorities execute an emergency eviction order. He is technically a squatter with a fraudulent lease. No police yet, Rachel corrected. I want to watch the house fall down around him first. Just cut the utilities. Power, water, gas, internet, everything. Shut it down. The grid operator is a subsidiary of ours. I am accessing their mainframe now, Gregory said. Rachel, a security detail is still en route to extract you. You cannot stay in the car. Tell them to park at the end of the block and wait, Rachel said. I'm not leaving. I want a front row seat. Very well. Commencing Protocol Omega. Good hunting, Rachel. The line clicked dead. Rachel placed the phone on the passenger seat. The heater was finally blowing hot air, thawing her frozen limbs. She leaned back against the headrest, folded her arms, and fixed her gaze on the glowing windows of the $3 million house. Inside, Daniel Bennett was laughing. 5. Rachel counted down in her head. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inside the house, the grand chandelier in the foyer suddenly flickered, and then, with a heavy, groaning sound, every single light in the massive house blinked out, plunging the property into absolute, pitch-black darkness. In the sudden silence of the night, barely audible over the sound of the rain, Rachel heard the faint, muffled sound of Daniel dropping his crystal tumbler on the hardwood floor. It was just the beginning. Inside the sprawling Tudor on Oakwood Drive, the sudden absence of light was physically jarring. One moment, Daniel Bennett was sitting in a pool of warm, expensive illumination, nursing an 18-year-old Scotch. The next, he was swallowed by an ink-black void. The heavy crystal tumbler slipped from his relaxed grip, hitting the imported Brazilian hardwood floor with a sharp crack. Amber liquid splashed across his bare ankles and the hem of his tailored trousers. "Son of a—" Daniel cursed, his voice echoing strangely in the sudden, dead silence of the house. He didn't panic. Men like Daniel didn't panic over a blown fuse. He assumed the violent storm battering the windows had simply knocked a tree into a transformer down the street. It was an inconvenience, nothing more. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his iPhone, and activated the flashlight feature. The harsh, white beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the shattered glass at his feet. He stepped over the mess and navigated out of his study, the beam of his phone sweeping across the high ceilings and expensive artwork he had meticulously curated to project an image of generational wealth. He walked down the main hallway toward the mudroom, where the primary electrical panel was located. He opened the grey metal door of the breaker box. Not a single switch was tripped. They were all uniformly aligned in the on position. Frowning, Daniel tapped his phone screen to check the time. It was 11:14 p.m. He navigated to his utility app, fully expecting to see a widespread outage map covering the entire North Shore area. But as the app tried to load, the little loading circle spun endlessly. He glanced at the top right corner of his screen. His cell service, which usually boasted a flawless 5G connection, now displayed a blinking SOS symbol. No service. Cheap garbage, he muttered, assuming the storm was interfering with the cell towers. He walked back into the kitchen, his irritation mounting. It was fine. He had planned for this. When he had purchased the house, he had insisted on installing a top-of-the-line, whole-home standby generator. It was supposed to detect a power loss and kick on automatically within 10 seconds. It had been nearly 3 minutes, and the house remained dead. Daniel marched to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the covered patio. The wind whipped rain into his face, instantly soaking his expensive shirt. He shined his flashlight toward the side of the house where the massive, commercial-grade generator sat. He marched over to it, shielding his phone from the rain, and flipped open the control panel. The digital display was completely dark. He pressed the manual override switch. Nothing. He tried to prime the engine. Silence. It was as if the machine had been totally disconnected from its fuel source, which, technically, it had. Miles away in a secure server room, Gregory Blackwood's cyber team had breached the smart home network Daniel was so proud of, manually overriding the digital gas valves and shutting off the fuel supply to the property. Shivering, Daniel retreated back inside, locking the door behind him. The temperature in the house was already dropping. The radiant floor heating, which usually kept the hardwood pleasantly warm against his feet, was rapidly cooling into slabs of ice. He went to the kitchen sink, intending to grab a paper towel, wet it, and wipe the spilled scotch off his leg. He turned the polished chrome faucet. A brief, pathetic hiss of air sputtered from the aerator, followed by a few muddy drops of water. Then, nothing. Daniel aggressively cranked the handle back and forth. No water. He tried the filtered water dispenser on the refrigerator. Dead. The annoyance finally curdled into a genuine sense of unease. A power outage was one thing. A simultaneous failure of the water main, the backup generator, and the cellular network was something else entirely. It felt profoundly unnatural. He walked to the front living room and peered through the bay window. He expected to see the entire street plunged into darkness. Instead, he saw the Gables' massive colonial house directly across the street glowing brightly. Their porch lights were on, and he could see the flicker of a television through their upstairs window. The street lights were operating perfectly. Only his house was dark. Only his house was dead. Suddenly, he remembered Rachel. A cruel, sudden smirk cut through his unease. She must be freezing to death out there, he thought. He assumed she was huddled on the porch, weeping, learning exactly what happened when you questioned the man who provided everything. He decided he would let her in. He would open the door, demand an apology, and then make her clean up the broken glass in his study in the dark. He walked to the foyer, the beam of his phone bouncing off the walls. He unlocked the deadbolt, the mechanical click loud in the silent house, and pulled the heavy mahogany door open. "All right, Rachel, you've made your point," he started, his voice dripping with condescension. He stopped. The porch was empty. He swept his flashlight across the slate tiles. Nothing but pooling rain. He stepped out, the wind biting through his damp clothes, and looked around the yard. That was when he saw it. Parked at the edge of the driveway, half obscured by the driving rain, was Rachel's beige Volvo. The engine was running, the headlights off, but he could see the faint red glow of the tail lights and the steady exhaust pluming in the cold air. "Stubborn child," Daniel sneered under his breath. She had retreated to her pathetic car to stay warm. Let her sleep in the driveway, he decided. Let her wake up with a stiff neck and a newfound respect for his authority. He slammed the front door shut, throwing the deadbolt once more. He didn't realize that from the warmth of the Volvo, Rachel was watching him. She had seen the beam of his flashlight sweep the porch. She had seen his silhouette in the doorway. She watched him retreat back into his freezing, lightless tomb, completely unaware that the invisible noose Gregory Blackwood had constructed was already pulling tight around his neck. By 2 a.m., the temperature inside the Oakwood Drive house had plummeted to 45 degrees. Daniel Bennett was curled on the leather sofa in his study, wrapped in 2 heavy down comforters he had dragged down from the master bedroom. He couldn't sleep. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the glass. He felt entirely isolated, cut off from the world he usually dominated. His personal iPhone had died an hour ago, drained by his constant, frantic attempts to find a cellular signal. He was staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that he would simply call a contractor in the morning and bill the emergency repairs to his corporate expense account, when the room was suddenly bathed in a harsh, blue light. Daniel bolted upright, throwing off the comforters. On his mahogany desk, his secondary device, a heavily encrypted, corporate-issued smartphone that ran on a dedicated satellite network for international business, had suddenly illuminated. He scrambled off the sofa, his bare feet stinging against the freezing floor, and snatched the phone. It had a signal, a perfect, full-bar connection. The screen displayed a single, urgent notification. An email from the Apex Financial Executive Human Resources Department. Daniel unlocked the phone, his thumb slightly numb from the cold. He opened the email. The subject line was in all caps, a glaring red flag in corporate communication. Subject: immediate termination of employment and revocation of access. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He read the first paragraph, his eyes darting frantically across the small screen. Dear Mr. Bennett, effective immediately, your employment as Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Apex Financial is terminated for cause. Following an internal audit initiated by our parent holding company, we have uncovered irrefutable evidence of gross financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and the unauthorized diversion of client funds into offshore entities. Please be advised that all corporate access, including email, intranet, and physical building access, has been permanently revoked. Furthermore, Apex Financial's legal counsel has formally notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service regarding the wire transfer of $85,000 to the entity known as Blue Horizon Holdings. Daniel stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy in the blue light of the phone. How? He had executed that transfer mere hours ago. He had used a secure VPN. He had routed it through the Caymans. It was supposed to be untraceable, a clean extraction of funds before he served Rachel with divorce papers. Apex Financial was a massive, slow-moving bureaucracy. An audit like that should have taken months, not hours. His hands began to shake violently. He dropped to his knees in front of the coffee table, desperately opening the mobile hotspot feature on the corporate phone. He booted up his personal MacBook, praying the battery had enough juice left. It flickered to life. He connected to the hotspot, his fingers flying across the keyboard with panicked, sloppy keystrokes. He opened his web browser and immediately navigated to his primary bank, Chase. He typed in his login credentials. The screen loaded, but instead of his dashboard showing his comfortable six-figure checking balance, a stark white page appeared with a padlock icon. Account locked. Fraud suspected. Please visit your local branch with 2 forms of government-issued identification. Error code 809-IRS-hold. No, 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 Daniel whispered, the sound ragged and desperate. He opened a new tab. He went to his Charles Schwab investment portfolio. He had nearly $400,000 tied up in index funds and tech stocks. It was his safety net. He logged in. The page loaded. Total account value, $0. Status, assets frozen pending federal investigation. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, chilling him faster than the freezing air of the study. He was entirely locked out of the financial system. His corporate career was annihilated. He was a millionaire on paper, but in reality, he didn't have a single cent to his name. Panic, raw and animalistic, finally set in. He needed to get out. He needed to access the $85,000 he had hidden in the Blue Horizon account. He could use that to hire a defense attorney. He could flee. He navigated to the dark web portal he used to access the Cayman account. It required 3 layers of authentication. He input them all perfectly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The offshore dashboard appeared. Daniel stared at the screen, his mind completely breaking. The balance was 0. But beneath the 0 was a message, typed in plain English, bypassing all the bank's automated systems. It wasn't an official bank notification. It was a direct, personal message injected straight into the portal's code. Did you really think I wouldn't check the ledger, Daniel? G. Blackwood. Daniel didn't know who G. Blackwood was. But looking at that name, an icy terror gripped him. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't an automated corporate audit. He was being hunted. Someone with godlike access to the global financial system was systematically erasing his life. Suddenly, his corporate phone buzzed again, nearly startling him out of his skin. It wasn't an email. It was an incoming text message, slipping through the iMessage network via his Wi-Fi hotspot. It was from Clara. Daniel snatched it up, desperate for a lifeline, desperate for a friendly voice. Maybe he could go to her apartment. Maybe she could front him some cash until he sorted this out. He opened the message. It was a frantic, rambling block of text. Clara. David, you sick bastard, what did you do? Thomas just woke me up screaming. Someone emailed him a zip file. It had everything. The pictures from Aspen, the receipts from the St. Regis, the audio notes you sent me. He packed my bags and threw me out in the rain. I have nowhere to go. My sister won't take my calls. He's taking the dog. He says he's calling a divorce lawyer at 8 a.m. and sending the file to my boss. Do not ever contact me again. I hate you. You ruined my life. Daniel dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. His job, gone. His money, gone. His mistress, gone. His reputation, destroyed. He sat on the floor of his freezing, dark, $3 million house, completely and utterly alone. The sheer velocity of his destruction was incomprehensible. It had been less than 4 hours since he locked Rachel out. 4 hours to dismantle 40 years of ruthless ambition and carefully constructed lies. For the first time all night, Daniel thought about the woman in the driveway. The quiet, unassuming woman he had shoved out the door. The woman who never asked questions about his business, who drove a 5-year-old Volvo, who he thought was a helpless dependent. No, he thought, his mind rejecting the impossible. It can't be Rachel. She doesn't have the power to do this. She works at an art gallery. She's nobody. But the timing was undeniable. Before he could process the thought any further, a new sound pierced the silence of the storm. It was the heavy, rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel. Daniel crawled toward the bay window, pulling himself up to peer over the sill. Through the driving rain he saw headlights sweeping across his front lawn. But it wasn't Rachel's Volvo moving. 2 massive, black, heavily armored SUVs had just pulled to a stop at the curb, boxing in the driveway. The engines rumbled with a deep, menacing hum. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the doors of the lead vehicle opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the rain. They were dressed in dark, tactical clothing, completely ignoring the freezing downpour. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, fanning out across the manicured lawn, heading straight for the front porch. Daniel's heart stopped. These weren't police officers. There were no flashing red and blue lights. There were no badges. This was a private extraction team. He backed away from the window, stumbling over the coffee table in the dark. He needed a weapon. He needed to hide. He turned toward the kitchen, toward the heavy butcher block where he kept the chef's knives. But before he could take 3 steps, a sound echoed through the massive house, freezing the blood in his veins. Thud, thud, thud. A massive, heavy fist pounding against the mahogany front door. Then, a voice, amplified by a megaphone, cutting through the storm outside with absolute, uncompromising authority. Daniel Bennett, this property is now under the legal control of Kingston Property Trust. You are currently trespassing. Open the door immediately, or we will breach it. Daniel Bennett backed away from the kitchen entrance, his bare feet slipping slightly on the freezing hardwood. The voice booming from the megaphone outside didn't belong to a police officer. It possessed a chilling, corporate sterility that terrified him far more than the threat of a standard arrest. Daniel Bennett, you have 30 seconds to comply before we initiate a forced entry protocol. You can't do this, Daniel screamed into the empty, pitch-black foyer, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and terror. I own this house. I have rights. I'm calling the police. He frantically tapped the screen of his corporate satellite phone, dialing 911. The call connected instantly, bypassing the dead local towers via orbit. Emergency dispatcher, what is your location? A calm voice answered. My house is being invaded. 4217 Oakwood Drive. Send units now, they have armored vehicles, Daniel yelled, pacing like a caged animal behind the sweeping grand staircase. There was a brief pause on the line. The sound of typing echoed in Daniel's ear. "Mr. Bennett?" the dispatcher asked, her tone shifting from helpful to distinctly bureaucratic. "We have a log from the Kingston Property Trust regarding that address. An emergency, court-ordered eviction is currently underway, executed by a licensed private security firm due to fraudulent tenancy. Local law enforcement has been instructed to stand down and observe only. Sir, for your own safety, I advise you to open the door and comply with the property owners." The line clicked dead. Daniel stared at the phone. Fraudulent tenancy? Property owners? The words swirled in his mind, nonsensical and completely devastating. Before his brain could process the fact that the local police had just abandoned him, a deafening mechanical whine erupted from the front porch. They weren't using a battering ram. They were using a hydraulic spreader, the kind firefighters use to pry open crushed vehicles. Crack! The sound of the reinforced door frame splintering echoed like a gunshot. The heavy deadbolt Daniel had so triumphantly slid into place hours ago tore through the imported mahogany like a hot knife through butter. With a final agonizing groan of tearing wood, the massive front door swung violently open, slamming against the foyer wall. 4 blinding, 1,000-lumen tactical flashlights pierced the darkness, crisscrossing the foyer and pinning Daniel against the wall beneath the staircase. "Hands where we can see them, Mr. Bennett," a voice commanded. A tall man stepped into the light, lowering his flashlight slightly so it didn't completely blind Daniel, though the glare remained blindingly oppressive. He wasn't wearing a ski mask or SWAT gear. He wore a high-end, waterproof tactical jacket with an earpiece discreetly coiled around his ear. His name tag simply read, "Harrison." "What is the meaning of this?" Daniel demanded, trying to inject some of his usual corporate authority into his voice. It failed miserably. He was standing in wet pajama pants, shivering violently, backed into a corner. Harrison ignored the question. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick, waterproof manila envelope, extending it toward Daniel. "You are being formally served," Harrison said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "These are emergency eviction documents, authorized by a federal judge at 1:15 a.m. this morning. You are trespassing on property owned by Kingston Global Trust. Furthermore, enclosed is a civil suit from Apex Financial regarding the embezzlement of $85,000, and a restraining order filed on behalf of your wife, Rachel Kingston." Daniel didn't reach for the envelope. He stared at Harrison, his lips trembling. "Rachel Kingston," Daniel whispered. "Her name is Rachel Smith." Harrison let the envelope drop to the floor. It landed with a heavy, wet slap against the slate tiles. "You have 5 minutes to gather 1 bag of personal clothing and exit the premises. If you attempt to take any items purchased with funds from the joint accounts, you will be detained for theft. Your time starts now." "Where am I supposed to go?" Daniel stammered, the reality of his total annihilation finally crushing the last remnants of his ego. "I have no money. My accounts are frozen. My car. Your Porsche Panamera is currently being loaded onto a flatbed tow truck in the driveway," Harrison interrupted smoothly. "It was leased under a subsidiary of Apex Financial, which has now revoked your corporate perks due to termination for cause. As for where you go, Mr. Bennett, that is entirely your problem. 4 minutes." It took Daniel exactly 3 minutes to pack. He stumbled through the pitch-black house, using his dying corporate phone for light, grabbing a duffel bag from the master closet. He stuffed it with whatever he could find: a pair of jeans, a heavy wool sweater, some socks. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely manage the zipper. He didn't look at the expensive watches on his dresser. He didn't look at the custom-tailored Italian suits. He knew if he touched them, Harrison's men, who were silently flanking him in the darkness, would drop him to the floor. He walked back downstairs, his heavy boots clomping against the hardwood. The house he had proudly claimed as his kingdom felt entirely alien now. A dark, freezing tomb that had never belonged to him in the first place. Harrison and his men escorted Daniel out the shattered front door and onto the porch. The storm hadn't broken. The freezing rain immediately soaked through his wool sweater, plastering his hair to his forehead. He stood shivering on the slate tiles, watching as a massive industrial tow truck hauled his slate-grey Porsche away into the stormy night. "Keep moving," Harrison ordered, gesturing toward the street. Daniel trudged down the driveway, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the freezing mud splashing against his boots. The tactical team stood motionless on the lawn, watching him walk away. As he reached the end of the driveway, he saw the beige Volvo. It was still parked at the curb, the engine purring softly. As Daniel approached, the passenger side window rolled down with a smooth, electric hum. Warm air, smelling faintly of vanilla and leather, spilled out into the freezing rain. Daniel stopped, turning his head to look inside. Rachel was sitting in the driver's seat. She looked entirely dry, perfectly composed and terrifyingly calm. The soft, gentle woman who had cooked his dinners and endured his insults was gone. In her place sat a woman who looked exactly like the billionaire titan who had raised her. "Rachel!" Daniel choked out, stepping toward the car. His pride was completely shattered. He was ready to beg. "Rachel, please, I don't understand. What did you do? Just let me in the car. We can talk about this." Rachel didn't look at him with hatred. She didn't look at him with anger. She looked at him with the absolute, chilling indifference one might reserve for an insect on the windshield. "You locked me out, Daniel," she said, her voice perfectly level, easily carrying over the sound of the rain. "You told me to go cool off. I was drunk. I was angry. You were snooping," Daniel pleaded, gripping the strap of his duffel bag until his knuckles turned white. "You took my job. You took my money. You took my house." "I didn't take anything," Rachel corrected him smoothly. "I simply stopped protecting you from your own mediocrity. The house was mine. The job at Apex was granted because of my father's influence. The money you stole was mine. I gave you the illusion of power because I wanted a peaceful life, and you used that illusion to try and break me." Daniel stared at her, the rain running down his face, mixing with tears of absolute humiliation. He had spent 7 years believing he was the master of a universe that she had quietly purchased for him. "Clara sent me a message," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "She's gone. Everything is gone. I have nothing, Rachel. I have absolutely nothing." "You have your duffel bag," Rachel said, "and you have a long walk to the train station. I suggest you start moving. The temperature is supposed to drop below freezing by dawn." "Rachel, please." She pressed a button on the console. The tinted glass of the passenger window smoothly rolled up, cutting off his pleas, trapping him once again in the freezing, deafening roar of the storm. Daniel stood paralyzed in the street, watching as the Volvo's transmission engaged. The station wagon pulled smoothly away from the curb, its red tail lights glowing brightly as it disappeared down the affluent, tree-lined street, leaving him entirely alone in the dark. He looked back at the house. The massive, shattered front door stood open to the elements. Harrison and his men were already inside, securing the property that belonged to Kingston Global. With trembling hands, Daniel adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, turned his back on the life he had destroyed, and began the long, freezing walk into the abyss. The story of Daniel Bennett serves as a chilling testament to the fragility of arrogant power. He built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute control, using financial abuse and psychological manipulation to dominate a woman he believed to be entirely defenseless. His fatal flaw was the assumption that his cruelty was matched by his intelligence. In the end, the very lock he turned to punish his wife became the catalyst for his own profound unmaking. Rachel Kingston's retaliation was not merely a display of immense generational wealth. It was a masterclass in surgical precision. She didn't raise her voice, and she didn't resort to violence. Instead, she dismantled the architecture of his life, brick by brick, exposing the devastating reality that he was only ever a temporary guest in her world. Ultimately, the man who thought he held all the keys was left standing in the freezing rain, holding a duffel bag, realizing too late that true power rarely needs to announce itself. It simply waits for the perfect moment to strike.